a little bit about myself. I spent almost 4 decades at the Walt Disney Company. I started as an animator. I was a director in feature animation. And then I moved to Imagineering. And Imagineering, for those of you who don't know, is the theme park and experience division. And there, I kind of rose through the ranks and ended up being a senior creative, and I was in charge of projects across a whole platform of different units in the company. I worked on cruise ships, hotels, the theme parks, retail. And then I kind of retired from the company. I actually, I felt like my expiration date had come and it was time to move on. And for the last few years, I've been a creative consultant, and I'm creating fun in all kinds of cool places. I'm doing theme parks and working in the UX world. And basically, that's what my little sketch here is about. I feel like, I graduated from Disney and I learned so much along the way. So I'm going to pass some of that. I hope I can pass some of that on to you today in the way of how I found to channel my creativity at Disney. And that was through this joy of childhood. And I put this slide in just to remind everybody, Disney has a childlike spirit, but it's not childish. And that worked so well for me. In fact, at one point, the Imagineers were asked to create or write or draw or do whatever they could to explain their creative process and how they Imagineer. So for me, the key to being an Imagineer was allowing the child in me to have full range. I refused to let go of the child that looked for fun and allow me to approach Imagineering from this kid's point of view. So I came up with these 8 kid tips. And today I'm going to use those kid tips to illuminate, my creative process and how I use them both on projects and in some cases in life too. So I'll quickly go through them here. My first kid tip was play without bounds or judgment. Second is to look for wonder. Third is force connections. The fourth is to break the rules, one of my favorites. Allow yourself to dream. Look for the gray. To change hats. And most importantly, make it fun. And hopefully that'll come through my presentation because I'm all about fun. So let's start with the first one. Play without bounds of judgment, because as adults, we're taught to be severe critics of anything impractical or flippant. In fact, if you heard Maxim's keynote this morning, he talked about the death of childhood in us as we get older, and we have to deal with the problems of the world, and we lose track of that childhood wonder inside of us. But kids, on the other hand, routinely practice doing the impractical and the flippant. They play without bounds, allowing the free flow of ideas without judgment. So in my work, our process always started with storyboarding or brainstorming. And I always like to remind my teams that there were no bad ideas. We would throw as many ideas up on the wall, and I didn't care where ideas came from either. If the janitor was walking by and he had a good idea, I said, "Come on in, let's see what you have to say." So this idea of keeping all ideas really served me well. Especially my first big project that I did at Disney, I created this, not me personally, but I led the design for this Mickey's Toontown, which was the land where the cartoon characters lived. And we actually created this little world, all the houses where the cartoon characters lived. But interestingly, when we got the assignment, I got the assignment to do it, I discovered there was no definitive house or place that these characters lived in. So once again, we had to create without bounds. We knew who the characters were. Mickey was everyman, Goofy was Goofy. And using that process, we were able to, come up with the attributes that then guided our thinking and guided our choices in creating the physical place that now exists at Disneyland and in Tokyo. Okay, number 2 is look for wonder. There I am. I meant to mention earlier, these little sketches that I did. The first sketch of me with the beard and the Hawaiian shirt, that was an earlier version, a younger version of me. I did these back in the 90s. So that's why the little kid's wearing a Hawaiian shirt here. And it says, look for the wonder. Kids notice things like butterflies, sand dollars, and soap bubbles, and are able to see the wonder in each. Are you? I mentioned in my keynote this morning, I have a little grandson, and he just loves to sit and just play in the water or play with the bubbles and lose track of time, and just he becomes part of that world, which I'll talk more about later. So I like to start with this quote from Henry Miller, the great playwright and an author, because I think it kind of illustrates what I'm talking about very well. It says, develop an interest in life as you see it, in people, things, literature, music. The world is so rich, simply throbbing with rich treasures, beautiful souls, and interesting people. Forget yourself. And I think that's what kids do. I mean, their ego, they haven't grown this big adult ego yet. So they can easily let go of who they are and just get involved in the world. And one of the ways I do that is I always carry a sketchbook with me and a camera, and I try to capture the world in my sketches and in the camera, but not recording the world, but letting the world inspire me. And I recently took a trip. This is a good example of this. I recently took a trip to Europe, and I was in Berlin, and I was in Sicily, and I always like to look at the world through this my child eyes, and not just look at beautiful landscapes and such, but what are all those crazy, quirky things that make the world so much fun? Things like in a hotel lobby finding a giant flamingo, or walking down the street and passing a pastry shop and finding a giant cannoli there. So then I take these pictures, and then I usually either have my sketchbook with me, or I'll go back to the hotel and record impressions and moments, through that kid lens. Like in Berlin, went to the Brandenburg Gate, and there was this crazy guy at a organ grinder, but he was also selling hot dogs. So I thought, oh, okay. So I did organ grinder with a dancing hot dog. And then, Berlin has this crazy edge to it. And the people were very interesting people, as you can see in my little sketch there in the lower left-hand corner. In Sicily, I actually saw this dog that stole a pizza and was running down the street. So, the sketchbook just becomes a very important tool for me, not just to see the world and record it, but to let it inspire me and create ideas. Which brings me to another great quote, this one from George O'Keeffe. Because again, kids take time. I think we are so distracted by cell phones and computers and all those things that, draw us out of the now. And George O'Keeffe says, nobody sees a flower really. It's so small. It takes time. We haven't time, and to see takes time. Like to have a friend takes time. If you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, your world, it's your world for the moment. Wow. Thank you, Georgia. Okay, number 3 is forced connections. Kids have a way of combining seamlessly unrelated elements, thus creating new ideas. This helps the mind see relationships differently, opening it up to fresh connections. You can see, kids put 4 things on a table, and kids will play with them in ways you never even imagined. And, that served me very well with a lot of the projects I had to do. And I pulled this example. I was asked to design a miniature golf course down in Florida. And they didn't want just this is Disney, so it's got to be a themed miniature golf course with a story, and it was going to be next to this big pavilion. So you can see how we forced connections here. We took the idea of beautiful gardens, mixed them with miniature golf, and then they wanted it, of course, Disney branded. So in this case, we used Fantasia because we felt like the different movements from that film, the musical movements, fit this idea of creating a garden. And you can see some of my sketches and the finished product that we created there by by forcing connections, putting things together. There is a great book out there, highly recommend. It's called A Whack on the Side of the Head. And the author, this Roger Van Oak, talks a lot about this idea of connections, but also looking outside of what you're doing for inspiration. You can see his quote here: anyone can look for fashion in a boutique or history in a museum. The creative explorer looks for history in a hardware store or fashion in an airport. And he also, he gives this example like, well, if you had to create like a modern suit of armor, don't go looking, don't go on Wikipedia, don't go on the internet and look for, historical references on suits of armor. He says, no, what is a suit of armor? It's a protective shell. Maybe look at bug exoskeletons. And the whole idea of looking outside of, what you would normally think is the source is a great way to come up with a fresh and original idea, which we always want to do, fresh and original. Okay, number 4 is break the rules. Kids move boundaries, add players, or change the point system. This opens the mind to possible creative alternatives. And I gave the example this morning in my keynote. We had to design this slide for the cruise ships when I was in charge of designing the cruise ship. And everybody said, it can't be done. You can't elevate a slide and put that much weight on the top of a cruise ship because, it's going to tip over. But it was a crazy idea. And we challenged the engineers to break the rules, come up with a way to do it. And guess what? They did. There it is. It actually happened. There was also this, one of the executives at Disney said, sometimes it's easier to beg forgiveness than to ask permission, especially in a big organization. And I put this quote, actually, it's a song from the musical Matilda, which is by Roald Dahl. And it says, sometimes you have to be a little bit naughty. And so sometimes in life, it's not causing trouble, but it's as I said this morning, it's believing in yourself and your idea enough to just move forward with it. And hopefully it will awe people in such a way that you're not going to get in trouble and you won't have to beg for permission. You know what? And Walt Disney, everybody remembers Walt as the man in the gray suit on the TV show, and he looked very conservative. This guy was a disruptive thinker. He was a radical. He tried things, created, new techniques for animation, created the animatronics, and then the whole idea of Disneyland, was a very disruptive because all that existed at the time were these cheesy amusement parks. But Walt said, you know what? I am going to create a form of entertainment that's story-driven and is going to use technology. And he changed the world. But it was through his disruptive thinking. He broke the rules and created this whole new genre of entertainment. Number 5 is allow yourself to dream. Kids spend a lot of time imagining all sorts of strange and wonderful things. This opens up a world of possibilities. There I am, looking out the window, imagining myself as a hummingbird. But I would encourage my teams to spend the time. And time is an elusive thing. And there's this great book by Eva Kaufman called Time. And in it, she says, if we do not want to live meaninglessly, then we need to give ourselves over sometimes to the time of inwardness and contemplation, to empathy and aesthetic wonder. We need to mull and muse, to reflect on our experience and interpret it. We need occasionally to go with the flow. And boy, if you're with kids, like I said earlier, they just lose track of time. They whatever they're doing, they go with that flow. And I really allowed myself. Sometimes, it got me in trouble, but for the most part, going with the flow and finding those strange and wonderful things out in the world, and then applying them to the various projects I did, from, as I mentioned, Toontown to, I worked in Tokyo on Mermaid Lagoon, that crazy miniature golf course. But most of it came out of, spending time with myself and my teams. I would always say, give my teams, allow them the time to dream. And then one of my biggest dreams, this last project that I did in Hong Kong before I left the company, was this Mystic Manor. And what was great about this project, again, we were challenged to come up with a whole new kind of haunted mansion, because in China, of course, the whole concept of the haunted mansion is singing happy ghosts, and that didn't work with their concept of the afterlife. So we came up with our own story, but it only happened because we allowed ourselves to dream. And number 6 is look for the gray. Kids are delighted to explore an endless range of possibilities. Everything has creative potential. And I cite this project that we did in Hong Kong because it is a celebration of kids' creative potential. It's based on the movie Toy Story. If you remember, Toy Story is Andy, the character in that movie, has all these toys, and he doesn't care that one toy is an outer space toy and one toy is a cowboy toy, and he's got his little dog toy, and he mixes them all together and creates his own worlds of imagination. And that's basically what we did with this project. We explored this endless range of possibilities, basically based on the movies, but then we did our interpretation of turning them into rides and attractions. And change hats. Kids are great at pretending to be a fireman or a princess. You gain new perspective by putting yourself in a different situation. I remember as a kid, I actually had this little toy box that I had a fireman's hat in it. I had a spaceman's helmet in it. My sister also had like a princess's hat in it, and we would go and we would play, and we would put the hat on. We would become, those characters. And actually that served me well. I mean, practically too, because I made this change in my career. When I started out, I was an animator working on these films you saw there. But I was able to take all those learnings from animation, then apply them to this practical world, this physical world of designing parks and experiences and such. And one of the biggest changes for me and challenges where changing my hat came in was when I got to design these cruise ships, or work in charge of designing these cruise ships, because here it was like a whole different world of limitations and technical understandings that you had to work with. But I put on my captain's hat and start to understand, what it meant to, work in this with nautical engineers and come up with these new products that hadn't been done before. And again, Walt was an inspiration because he said, "I never stand still. I must explore and experiment." Boy, if that doesn't sum up the whole idea of what I'm talking about, nothing does. And finally, number 8 is make it fun. I really, it's my motto, and I actually have this framed on the wall in my office here, as I did at Disney, and it said, and people quoted me, "If it ain't fun, it ain't done," because kids know the value of humor and playfulness. Great ideas flourish in an atmosphere of fun and silliness. And I actually, not only at Disney, but I saw this firsthand, and I was very fortunate to get to work with the master puppeteer, brilliant Jim Henson, because there was a point where he was going to do some work with us at Disney. And I just remember going to his studios in New York, and remember the Muppet Show, how crazy and chaotic that felt? That was the world that he created in his studios. And honest to goodness, I say, that's why his product was the way it was, was a reflection of that free, fun silliness. So that kind of sums up my kid tips. Play without bounds or judgment, look for wonder, force those connections, put crazy things together, know the rules and then break them if you can. Take the time to allow yourself to dream. Look for the gray, find all those crazy things that you can put together in a way that have never been put together before, and allow yourself to change hats, to see the world through someone else's perspective. And then most of all, have fun. And then one last quote from Walt, which I loved. He said to his artists, Be like a sponge. Be a student of the world. Go out and soak up everything. Be curious. And one more thing, make sure you're having fun doing it, okay? All righty, now you've hung on, and those of you who were at my keynote this morning know I asked a very important question, very important. And that is, why are bananas funny? And it's a very simple answer. Because monkeys eat bananas, and monkeys are funny. There you go. Oh my God, I can't believe I put the slide in there. Did I really do that? I did. All right, thank you guys. So thank you so much. I had fun. I hope you had fun. Go out in the world, take some time, soak up all the beauty and the magic that's out there, because in these crazy, really trying times that we live in, you know, we got to rise above it. And so think like a kid. If you want to check out my website, there's my website, and follow me on Instagram and on LinkedIn, and maybe you can learn a thing or two, or if you have some great ideas, send them to me.